All right. So Capital One had an outage last week, started on, I think Wednesday. There's some differing statements out there. Some say it started late Tuesday night. Others say it started on Wednesday. One of their third-party providers had a power outage at a data center, and as a result, it looks like a majority of services were unavailable for Capital One customers. And we actually did an episode on this, right, where we talked about how you should use even other organizations' incidents and improve your own capabilities. And so as you both also know, I like to look at these incidents and look at how the organizations are handling it. And so I have some thoughts on that, but I would love to hear from the technology and infosec side of the house. How do we feel about a third-party data center power outage taking down a giant like Capital One?
Well, I mean, we have that third-party risk thing that we talk about a lot, and I think there's a lot of talk about it. But what does it actually mean, and what are we doing about it? And I think in a lot of cases, what we're doing about it is taking a SOC 2 report or something like that and going, sweet, we're good. And that ain't it, unfortunately.
What? You mean all the documents didn't work?
All the documents didn't work.
Yeah.
When we talked a couple of times about these organizations that are, so large that you can't even really deal with them as a vendor because it's kind of take it or leave it. And the vendor that had the problem behind Capital One is one of those. And as large as Capital One is, this vendor's even bigger, right? And is used by probably half of the credit unions and banks and credit card companies out there. I mean, literally, they processed $12 trillion in 2023. That's how much money they processed.
So a wee bit.
So
they're big.
You put your eggs in one basket. You depend on the big. Well, they're so big that they can't possibly be taken down by a power outage in a data center somewhere in the south, and yet here we are, right? And I mean, Capital One was not the only one affected by this, but they seem to be taking the brunt of the dissatisfaction from the rest of the economy.
I hadn't even heard. Someone texted me on Friday night and said, "Did you see this Capital One thing?" Because they know that I like to, look at this. And I was like, no. And then I looked at it and I thought, well, I'm not a Capital One customer, and it didn't make the news. I guess there's more important things happening in the world right now. But I hadn't even heard about it. So
well, and it was multi-day, right? So
yep.
I mean,
they were still working on it yesterday.
This was not a few hours here, and
no. So question. So data center power outage. To me, like, that's something that there should be some redundancies, right? Like, even just, am I off track here?
No, I mean, you look at the big tech companies and how they organize their data centers. They're built around that sort of redundancy that, if one entire data center goes down, they have other options. Granted, I mean, that's a lot of money and time and resources to do that. But when you are also an organization like this, you also have those resources to think about that, right?
So I had the opportunity to tour a data center with Brian one time, actually, and it was one of the coolest things to actually see the generators, just the whole setup and the level of redundancy that was in that data center. And so when I heard that it was due to a power outage at a data center, which is what, again, the I guess the official statement is, right? Doesn't mean that was actually the issue. I just thought, how does that even happen for an organization that size?
I can't imagine how. I mean, I guess we have to take their word for it that this is what happened, but I can't imagine an organization that big. I mean, we don't work for organizations that are anywhere near that large, and I can tell you how shocked I would be if we had a major outage like that that was caused by a power outage
Hmm.
for this long of a time. And I can't imagine how, an organization that is involved in so many, Fortune 500 companies and the world's largest insurance companies, and they have an outage in a data center in the Southwest, and uh, on the back end, we've seen some things where they had to replace servers, and it's just not adding up. It's just not adding up.
I
Yeah.
also watched on the business continuity side because I usually look at, especially communication is always your number one from a business side is where people fail, right? Like you fail on the communication side.
Right.
And interestingly enough, so there was nothing on Capital One's website at all, like not a mention. Now, again, I don't bank with them. So maybe if you logged into online banking, there was a message. I have no idea. But then I went to social media, and on Facebook, they had put out two messages, one on Thursday or Friday, and then one yesterday on Saturday. And well, we're recording on Sunday in case you haven't figured it out. But so they put out two social media messages, and then based on the comments, which there were a lot of them, they send out one email to their clients. And in the messages were very broad, right? Just saying like, we're fixing it. And then understandably, the customers were pretty ticked off. I guess payroll didn't make it, right? Like ACH didn't get processed.
Correct.
Bills didn't get paid. People got fees. There were stories. And again, I take this with a grain of salt because social media is social media. But, there were stories about calling the customer service hotline and the employees basically saying they didn't know what was going on. So that was interesting to see the lack of communication on that side as well. And then, of course, the word breach came up because people are like, well, you're down that long. It's got to be a breach, right? And there was no message to the contrary on anything, which was just interesting to watch. And something to be, I guess, from my perspective, always to be aware of, right? In the absence of information, people make up their own.
Assumptions are made.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's very clear to see that in that incident. So I guess for our listeners, what's your look at this and do X, Brian?
Accept the fact that this is a possibility no matter who you're dealing with, no matter what vendor you're dealing with. In situations like this, it's not generally possible for most small organizations to have a backup when the cost on these things is insane. So just accept the fact that this kind of thing may happen, plan for it, and get ready for it, and have your messaging ready. And there's not a whole lot you can do about it, but you better be prepared for it because it's Capital One in this case, not FIS, who took the heat.
Yep. Glenn?
Yep. I agree with a lot of those things. Just because you can't necessarily control the state of a vendor doesn't mean you're without power to prepare. And that's the message that I would send first and foremost. You can have communication ready. You can have thought out what sort of communication needs to happen to your customer base, your member base. You can do more to vet your vendors and hold their feet to the fire a little bit too. Granted, in this case, we've got a colossal vendor. You don't have much weight to throw around, but anywhere you can get contract provisions inserted, negotiate on those things. I mean, your contract is your means of control here, and maybe you don't have much in it, but it's where you might look. So keep that in mind too, and just think through scenarios like this. I love tabletop exercises. I know, Daniela, you love them too for similar reasons. Think through scenarios like this. I love to pose this in tabletop exercises where the idea that your third party that you're reliant on is not available for some reason. What does that effect have on your organization? What really is the impact? And you learn a lot of things going through that. You learn what the impact really is and is not in that. So
Yeah, you both kind of summed it up pretty well. I guess the one thing I'll add is kind of in line with what Glenn just said. Your vendor due diligence is not enough. Okay. You do have to understand that even though you collected all the documents and you checked all the boxes, that doesn't mean that this won't happen to you. Because I'm pretty sure that somewhere at Capital One, someone has a stack of documents that are the vendor due diligence for this third party. And yet here we are. So, everyone's point, like, use this as a learning exercise for me, like have a conversation about, hey, if this happens to Capital One, it can happen to us as well.
Really understand
Right.
where your vendors are plugging in and how they're plugging into your business and business processes. Like,
Yep.
I think that can't be understated, I guess.
Yep. And that's it for our Bytewise banter.